Thank you. Welcome everyone to tonight. This is a great honour for us, the Reconciliation for Western Sydney, to be putting on this event. Things have had to change, as you know, our venue's changed, but this actually is the time for our monthly meeting, and we're looking forward to this evening because this is something that's very important to us all, and we hope you get something out of it, get something important out of tonight. We're glad you could come, and that due to the unwanted last-minute changes of the venue, we're glad you could come and that you care about the Uluru Statement and its first step of implementation through a referendum on the Voice. My name's Jonathan Atkin, and I'm a co-chair of Reconciliation for Western Sydney. Yeah. And here's Marie Maguire, who is a co-founder of Reconciliation for Western Sydney. That was in 1997. So she's been with us for a long time, as Richard and many other people who are here tonight. Okay. The two of us will be co-facilitating our meeting tonight. But first, let's receive a welcome to country on this land of the Barramatagal and Tungagal people of the Darug Nation that has never been ceded, and that Darug Elder, Chris Tobin, will graciously offer to us now a welcome to country. Thank you, Chris.
Wiradjuri Warragal, everyone, good evening, and Nalawa, welcome. I'm a bit hesitant with welcomes these days, for very good reasons. My daughter still can't afford to live in Sydney, and it's making the welcomes harder. However, I know that we've got beautiful, well-meaning people here, good folk, and so you are definitely welcome. But I actually try to speak up the acknowledgement of country these days. I think it's more powerful actually when groups get up and acknowledge country rather than me coming and going, it's our country and welcome to it, because people got carried away with that, I think. But you are very welcome. When we talk about country too, I love with our culture, it's not just welcome to the earth here. It's country for us includes all the brother and sister creatures that share the land with us, and we really need to be mindful. It's our job to look after them and manage country properly. But it's also, country extends to our ancestors that are still with us, be they in the sky country, that's still part of country, but also for the descendants or the people that follow us. And that's really important. Decisions that we're making today and make this year will affect the people that come after us. And so, yeah, it is important for these decisions. I'll talk a little bit more on the Voice later, probably be an alternate opinion. But hopefully a nice, respectful meeting that we have today. But I'll sit down and we can get on with it. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chris. Since 1997, Reconciliation for Western Sydney, a volunteer community group, has been working hard to grow understanding and build relationships with Indigenous people. We've connected with many First Nations people in Western Sydney and beyond, and other organisations to listen and learn and initiate or improve policies and programs for raising awareness in the community. Through our annual Building Bridges series of evenings that many of you have participated in, we offer the community at large an opportunity to learn directly from Indigenous people. Whoever they are, whatever they are able to present about their experience and knowledge regarding the topics of discussion. Actually, all three of our speakers tonight have generously contributed to these sessions over the years, and indeed open some hearts and minds. We are very grateful for some financial support we've received from Parramatta City Council and the New South Wales Reconciliation Group for carrying out this volunteer work, including tonight. We hope this evening will be a safe space for open and respectful communication that allows for different views to be heard, questions to be responded to, and information shared and received. We trust by the end of the night that you may feel less uncertain and more ready to make your own decision based on your conscience once you're in the polling booth to cast your ballot. As you will know from the agenda on hand, our process for tonight has basically three parts. First, we will listen to the three Indigenous speakers with different perspectives. We then will talk with each other in groups and discern key questions we need to have answered before we are ready to vote. In the third part, after a break for supper, our questions will be responded to by the speakers, and at the end, we close with final comments and encouragement to pursue our own next steps. Now, unfortunately tonight, one of our speakers, Jane Christian, the Darug chairperson of the Parramatta Council First Nations Advisory Group, had to drop out because of unforeseen special Darug commitments at this time. In addition, we just had a call from our expected Parramatta Federal MP, Andrew Charlton, that he had been called out to an important official meeting tonight. We had asked him to make a few comments following the First Nations speakers concerning what the government anticipates as next step after a referendum is passed. Now, just in the interest of time, I'd like to introduce all three of our speakers tonight at once and hope we can have a natural flow from one to the other once time is up. I'm going to be helped with keeping track of time tonight for our speakers with the help of our fine young member, Catherine Baker, who will put up a few cards to gently remind the speaker when it's time to finish their input. As you'll notice, we allowed more time for our first speaker because he will lay out the basic and complex information we all need to have to engage in productive conversations and be ready for our decisions later. We also have put together an information sheet for you, which has been distributed and handed out, and we hope that you'll make use of these afterwards. When missing, suspicions and negative reactions get fostered, as sadly happened on many recent debates and articles. Our first speaker is Geoff Scott, a Wiradjuri man who plays a leading role in the Uluru Dialogue of the Indigenous Law Centre of the University of New South Wales. He is meeting with groups all over the country right now. Geoff has been a long-term advocate of Aboriginal rights in various organisations and roles in Sydney and New South Wales. Thank you, Geoff, for making it possible to be here tonight. Chris Tobin is a Darug artist, educator and elder who's worked for many years in the National Parks and Wildlife Service. He is widely appreciated in Western Sydney and the Blue Mountains for his sharing of Darug wisdom through his Welcome to Country, his workshops and various educational and artistic endeavours. He is also on the Indigenous Advisory Board of the Western Sydney University. Now, Brooke Prentis is a Wakka Wakka woman, an experienced accountant, consultant, a Christian leader and poet who now works full-time with many organisations offering cultural awareness workshops and a program called Listening to the Uluru Statement from the Heart. So I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Geoff, who will give us an overall context with pertinent information regarding recognition, the Uluru Statement of Voice, Treaty and Truth, and the referendum as it stands now and its anticipated developments. Thank you, Geoff.
Okay. Thank you. It's coming up. It's coming up. Okay.
Turn the lights off, please. Turn off the front, this side. No, the other side. Yeah. Turn the other side.
I'll fall over everything. Okay. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge country, acknowledge the elders and the Darug people who are on this country meeting tonight.
Lost the sound.
Sorry.
Oh, that's working.
Okay. I'll speak into it. My name's Geoff Scott. As I said, I'm a Wiradjuri man from Western New South Wales. I've been involved in the Uluru Dialogue since 2015, and I was the Executive Director of the Referendum Council. We ran the dialogues. So I'm just trying to answer questions on that. I'll run through quickly what happened, because we've got 20 minutes, and I've got to sit down and you could ask me questions. So that's who we are. Could you take us through? The co-chairs are Megan Davis and Pat Ennis we're the education campaign. So we're out trying to educate people, politicians and, the community about how the Uluru Statement came into being, what it's about and what we're trying to achieve with it. And there are many questions you'll see in the media, and I'll try and answer those tonight. I'll be open and frank about them. Since 2011, it's going through that, there's been 12 regional dialogues. There were 1,200 delegates that went to those forums, and there's one national convention. Well, we think it's the largest sort of consultation on the constitutional issues for Aboriginal people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait people in the country. And you'll see I've never seen a document attract so much attention, be it from researchers, from politicians, from community. So it actually sparks people's attention. We'd like to get across those tonight. Next one. Next one. Well, that's the National Convention at Uluru. There were 250 people went to that one, and I'll go through briefly what that is. Next one. There were 13 dialogues held. There was about 120 people went to each one. When we first started out at the Referendum Council, we were going to have 60 dialogues, but after having a chat with the then Prime Minister, Mr Abbott, and he's offsider, we got 12. So we had to put up what we had, and then we structured and got it to the point. We still think it's important to go ahead. The rest of Australia's input to that whole process was online. At least we had a degree of consultation with Aboriginal and Torres Strait communities across the country. Each community was sponsored and hosted by an Aboriginal organisation across the country itself, and that's the ones who were there. And in Sydney there were two. There was one in Sydney that was hosted by New South Wales Land Council, and that was held here, and you can see where the other ones are. I'll go through and answer questions about that later if you have it. In terms of the process, we had a formula where 60% of the people who turned up at those meetings had to be people who had cultural authority, be it land councils, native title holders, traditional owners, those sort of people. There had to be 20% from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations, and then 20% individuals who didn't fit the other two, trying to get a broad cross-section. And that was the task given to each of the auspicious organisations, and they did the selections on who actually came. Go back one. In addition to that, just back one. In addition to that, there were 10 people from each of those forums elected to actually go to Uluru. That's where the Uluru participants came from. And that there were two conveners and then 5 working group leaders, local people who actually led the dialogue, and that's how we got the delegates for Uluru. What happened at Uluru was if you like, a substantive structured issue where we went through each of the matters that were being discussed. I'll try to put a summary up here of what went with the dialogues. Dialogues down the side, the issues across the top. Where it's red, the forum didn't agree. Where it's yellow, it was inconclusive, and where it was green, they agreed. To give you a summary of the discussions that were going on. Sorry, mate. Step out of the way. So on the statement of acknowledgement, which is actually just in a preamble statement of recognition, you can see there was not a lot of support. In terms of the head of power, section 5126, again, not a lot of support. Because the view there from lawyers is it doesn't matter how you change 5126, the government could always use it negatively. And I said, well, let's stay with the law we have. Starting a new law is just going to put us behind the 8 ball. So drop it. The prohibition on race discrimination was the same. The current Race Discrimination Act binds everyone except the Commonwealth Parliament. And even if we did have a provision in the Constitution, the Commonwealth Parliament could still not abide by it. So, well, why do that? And the one that got the most support was a voice to Parliament and agreement making, treaty. The other two, idea. Next one. We also went through each of those forums about 10 principles. Again, this is how much analysis went on in the meetings. And the people who went there did a great job in trying to get their head around, one, the Constitution, the civics, what their issues were, what the Constitution said, and what we were talking about, all in 3 days. Structured. So that was the statements there. All this is in the referendum final report, still available online, if you want to read how that happened and what it did.
I think it's turned your mic on, sorry. Did you push a button?
A button.
No. Yeah,
No.
you're back.
Okay, these are all on. These are all on. These are all online, and you'll see them in the referendum council reports. You can still Google it on the Google it, and it'll. I think it's just me. Hello. Hello. It's actually working. Hello. That's better. Okay. You'll see down the side. The people in the meetings were very focused on making sure we actually analysed every opportunity, every issue that came up. I mean, the first one was issue, did it diminish sovereignty? And across the board, they said the statement of acknowledgement, well, we're not sure whether it did or not, but the others did not. Did it involve substantive reform? We thought the statement of acknowledgement and the head of power did not, but the others did. So if you read through those, this is advanced self-determination and the UN Declaration. Again, the first two said no, the others supported it, but not the racial discrimination provision. Does it recognise the status and rights of the First Nations people? You can see the outcome. Does it tell the truth of history? Does it foreclose on future advancement? We don't want to waste an opportunity to reform. It was a mechanism for First Nations agreement making. Does it have the support of First Nations people, and does it interfere with positive legal arrangements? They were the principles we assessed each one of those against, and you see the outcomes there. I'll leave these PowerPoints and slides with people. You can distribute them, use them yourself, and do what you want with them.
Great. Thanks.
Okay. That's the statement itself. I hope everyone's read it, or most people have. Next one. Oh, sorry. How are you? Sorry. It's nice to see friends in the audience. The invitation itself, again, this is an important part. One of the real deliberations at the Uluru Dialogues and at the convention was that we weren't going to give the government a whole range of recommendations, because what's happened in the past, they pick the ones they want and ignore the other ones. We said, we're not going to do that, we're going to give one. And that was the focus, and that's where it came from. And it was a voice, treaty, truth, and the first one was voice. The sequence is important. What we don't have in this country is influence or a lobby or an organisation speaking on behalf of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, so we needed a voice. Closely followed by the need for treaty and truth-telling. And having a voice to even the playing field, to have someone of influence, to represent local voices, was seen as important to advance the other two. Basically, that was the premise put forward, and that's where the structure came from. So again, the sequence is important. Sorry. There are some people who talk about treaty first, but we've been trying to get treaty for 40 or 50 years. There's a few advances in the state level now, but again, we're not getting there. It's a way of actually levelling the playing field to some extent, and having someone there who'll go into bat for making sure the treaty process is done properly. Sufficient resources, sufficient issues and timing. Next one. Same again, the first reform is the voice, the second is the Makarrata Commission, which the government's already put money to, and that'll be to talk about treaty and truth-telling. That'll be post the referendum. Next one. Again, we've got support from most of the Aboriginal organisations across the country. That's the Central Land Council, the New South Wales Land Council, but most of the predominant Aboriginal organisations across the country are supporting us now. Not all. We also have a lot of support from community groups, from all the law societies, all the social justice groups across the country, so this has been very well put through those ones. Next one. Again, that's what we're doing at the moment. We tried to push for bipartisanship, but it hasn't happened yet. We haven't given up hope. We still continue to press it. We still go and see every politician every day to try and press those issues. And it's not all like the paper says. There are a lot of people on the Conservative side who still want to support it, but they're a bit bound by the current party provisions. So we hope to keep doing that. The government set up three groups to advance this. That is the referendum working group, the referendum engagement group, and the expert panel. The expert drafting group just gave advice to the Attorney General on the words and the provisions. The working group, again, analysed those words whether they're acceptable to Aboriginal people or not, Torres Strait Islander people. And the engagement group was about 40 people put together whose job will be to go out and sell. But they're having debates about how they're going to sell, what are the points and where it's going to, especially given the level of disinformation and misinformation that are circulating. Next one is what we're doing at the moment. Indigenous support, we have to go back and talk to the Aboriginal community. We could have been out there 12 months ago, we didn't have a question. We still didn't have a question, actually. I'll go through when that'll actually go through Parliament. So we haven't been able to do that until now. We're still doing the legal reform work. That's done through the ILC in terms of giving advice to government about what the wording should be and what the draft amendment should be. Obviously, equal support, again, speaking to politicians as often as we can, and the education campaign, such as tonight. They'll be ramped up over the next 5 months. Next one. That's the question itself, a proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve? It's a simple yes or no. Next one. That's the proposed amendment. There will be a body called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. That voice may make representations of the Parliament and the Executive Government on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. This is the one that gets all the attention about Executive Government. You've seen the debates in the papers all the time. The senior Catholic provisions down there, Brennan and Craven are saying no, but then they're leaving their mates are telling them they're not right. But there's a lot of debate around these issues. The government has settled on the Executive Government staying in there. We need to talk to the politicians and the ministers. If it was just the government, we'd have to speak only through the Parliament, which meant we have to wait until the law's already made before we can discuss them. We have to wait until the issues are there before we discuss what their impact is. Because in reality, it's the ministers and the public servants who develop policy and implement it. That's where our problem lies. The last one is the Parliament, subject to the Constitution, will have the power to make laws in respect to the composition, functions, powers and procedures of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Effectively, despite all the call for detail, it matters naught. And every politician that's called for detail is a little, to be kind, disingenuous. All the debates going on now will matter naught. The Parliament will set up a joint select committee after the referendum, when it wins, very positive, to actually go through and consult with people about what the powers, functions and roles of the voice will be. That's when you'll sort out what it will be. And all the stuff going on now is, it's quite ridiculous, but, you know, what happens, a politician lies twice, you know, it becomes policy. Anyway. What's happening now? The referendum machinery bill's already been through Parliament. We were waiting for that to get through. That set the rules for the referendum. Hasn't been updated since '77. It was the new provisions that came in. Basically what they've done is they've made the rules for the referendum about the same as for elections. So there'll be pre-polling, there'll be postal votes, there'll be pamphlets sent out to everyone, there'll be disclosure requirements, there'll be authorisation requirements. So the same issue. And the important part of that is about who can actually fund us, because all money raised by the Yes campaigns and the No campaigns, I suppose, is all going to be funded from private donors. So we spend most of our time either doing talks and trying to raise money. We can't get anything from overseas, it's a maximum of $100. But anywhere where someone contributes more than $15,000, we have to report to the AEC who they are, what they provided it for. So that's some of the disclosures. In terms of the referendum alteration bill, this is the bill that actually sets out what the question and the amendment will be. That went into Parliament on the 30th of March, it went to committee. Their submissions were called, they closed on the 21st of April. There was about 800 submissions. If you're really into it, you can read them all on the website. The report was tabled last Friday, the 12th, and it just recommended that the question go forward unaltered. So what was put up before, the one we just read out, that's what they recommended, and that's what will go to Parliament. We expect the debate to be considered in the week of the 22nd of June, and we hope that the bill is passed that week. So on that week, we will know what the question and the amendment is. We don't expect it to change, but you never know. But that's what 99% sure. That'll set it out. Next one. The window, it's important about when that bill passes, when the second house, it's got to go through the House of Reps and the Senate, when the second house passes it, the 6-month window opens. And the government must hold a referendum not less than 2 months out, not more than 6 months. So a 4-month window is in place, and that's at the discretion of the government when they hold it, or the Prime Minister. So that's what gives you the window. People are asking, why hasn't he said the date? Well, he can't. It's up to Parliament and the Constitution. Next one. Oh, that's just the question itself again. They're possible dates. When we think it'll be on. We think it'll be October 14. Maybe it'll be November the 25th. The other ones it can't be, October 7th, school holidays. The ones in orange are all parliamentary sitting days, and the other ones are out because we have football finals, car race. We have all these events. We have Melbourne Cup on the 4th. That's not going to happen either. Australians don't tend to vote when there's something else on, so they're trying to find a time where you get to maximise it. We're expecting 15% people not to vote anyway, and that's normal. Every election does that. And we think December will be too late, so we're thinking of the 14th of October, but, you know, as long as you don't have an economic crisis or something happens, people have got to be in a good position. The Prime Minister has to be in good stead or actually doing well, because he's next one. That's just the referendum dates itself. It triggers everything. When they issue the writs, that triggers all the key dates. Now, when the rolls close, when the authorisations come in, when the polling booths will open, when the writs, there's all different provisions. But that's the stuff we watch very carefully because we don't want to break the law. So if we do it, people will tell us. In response to the question about detail, the government's put out design principles. They've been selected from about a dozen reports over the last 10 years about people's designs and questions about what a voice should look like. It's not in stone. I expect the design principles will be used by the government when they go to consult with people post-referendum. All these people are asking, how are they going to be elected? Who's going to be elected? Yeah? It's like asking Parliament, well, who's going to be the Prime Minister? So it's up to the people. Same thing happens here. Next one. A bit of facts about a referendum. There's been 155 attempts at referendum since 1901. Of those, 111 never got to the people. Parliament never said you never say. They knocked them out beforehand. 44 actually went forward. Only 8 have been successful and 38 were unsuccessful. And 1977 was the last successful one. Next one. They're the unsuccessful ones and what time they were held. If you want to know about it, I can go through them. I'm a nerd, so I read all this stuff. But that's what we do. You understand them? So that's all the provisions that are there. You'll see there's been various attempts at getting things through. Next one. They're the successful ones. Not earth-shattering. We're a country that doesn't change our constitution easily. In fact, changing the Australian constitution is the most difficult one in the world, in a double majority. And Australians are very risk-averse. So you've got to convince people with a bit of clarity that this is a good idea before they'll go there. That's the task in front of us. So the Senate elections, about how they were done, that the Commonwealth could pay state debts after the war, the Commonwealth government could do social security, the 67 referendum for Aboriginal people, to be counted in the census and to have the Commonwealth have concurrent powers to make laws for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And then 77, the territory citizens could vote in referendums, how they fill Senate vacancies, and the judges had to retire at 70. Prior to that, they could just go on to a millennium or something. Next one. This is the double majority, which makes it so difficult. I'll just go through this quickly. The one on this side is really, we must need half the people. So 50% plus 1 is the minimum. Hopefully we get more. And on the other side, we must get 4 of the 6 states. We get 3 of the states and still get them 50%, doesn't get through. We've got to meet both those provisions. So they're in place. Territories don't count because they're not states. But the territory citizens count toward the main one. And that was that referendum in 77. That's where it's at. Next one. Our latest polling is that 83% of people, Aboriginal people, support it. Next one. Here's some polling. We'll go through it. We're running at 59-41 currently. In terms of the Australian public, you'll see the trend goes up and down a bit, but it's getting more and more volatile. But at least now people are asking the questions. There's some outrageous things being said, and we don't go there. We don't try and correct them. It just keeps through lockage. We're trying to focus on what the points are. Next one. That's male and female. As always, women tend to be more accepting of change, and they're looking at supporting it rather than males. That's what human nature is. Next one. In terms of age, again, the younger you are, the more you are accepting of change and prepared to make change, and the older you are, the more conservative you are. And it's just human nature. This is not something rocket science. Next one. That's about parties, who's supporting us and who's not. Sorry. The Greens have been the greatest supporter itself, followed by Labor. And then you've got the Coalition, and the Teals are the last one. Well, the Independents, I mean. This is support. Next one. That's just more questions about the state itself. I'll just do one more of these and then get on the next ones. That's more about voter strength. The voter strength is adjusting over time. What I mean by voter strength is the dark blue is people who are hard yeses. Whatever's happening, they're going to vote yes. Ones down the other end, whatever the colour is, down this end, they're hard no's. Whatever happens, they're going to vote no. We work in the middle, trying to retain the 28% and pick up some of the 17%. And that's the task in front of us. We poll every month. We don't do it any more often because it's too expensive. Next one. I'll just go through quickly. That's just more about both by gender, just for time. Keep going through it. By age. Next one. Voting intention, again, this is strengths. We poll this every month to give us an idea of where we're going. We also poll by electorate to work out where there's potential for changes. Next. It's by state again. The major problems are WA and Queensland, always have been. Next one. Okay, here's the Australian electoral roll. You can see on the roll at the moment we have about 17.5 million people on the roll as we speak. Now put that into context, half of that is about 8.7 million. And to be honest, we need 9 million yes votes to get across the line. That's the task in front of us. Next one. That's the Aboriginal enrolment forms, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander roll. Again, well, let's go back one.
What?
Back.
Sorry. Just on that one, it's about 97% enrolment for most of Australia. Aboriginal enrolment's about 85%. The big one at the moment you don't realise is youth enrolment is about 86%. That's the one. When most people who are young aren't got on the roll yet. They still want to have a bit of fun and do it, but that's just, again, it's human nature. Time. Okay, quick. Next one. That's the hill in front of us. We need about 9.4 million. That's our target. That's where we're going for. It's again about we're trying to keep the hard yeses, pick up some soft ones and the undecided to get some more of them. This is where we target in terms of the campaign. Next one. That's the electoral roll by state. This is by state, by age group and by issues. You can see there are about 5.6 million people over 60. Our target there is how do we get to the older generation? And our target now is Facebook. That's the biggest use of it. There's no papers anymore. People don't read the papers. They're behind firewalls. So the whole structure's changed in the modern environment. Next one. That's relative representation. A lot of people I go to issue, especially in the territory, saying, why have we only got 2 senators? Why haven't we got 12? So it's the Constitution. So you go through that process. They're the numbers. Next one. This is where the Indigenous reps are. People say we have 11 reps. Why do we need more? Well, they look after their party and their electorate, not people on the whole. And that's their job. And this may change in the next election. We're after certainty here. Okay, I'm going hard on this one now. These are 2 options for people in Australia. If you want one, you can vote yes for change and recognise the First Peoples of Australia and give First Nations people a say in the matters that affect them. Or 2, you can vote no, have no change, deny recognition and deny First Peoples a say. That's basically what it is. The next one, for First Nations people. If you want to vote yes, step up and step in and take on the system that's oppressed us and held us back. Or you can vote no, step down and step away, accept the status quo, just keep howling at the moon and thinking you make a difference. We've been talking about these things for years. We have to have change. We can't have another generation of kids in the same position. We can't keep going with incarceration, with child protection rates, the cultural heritage issues. The list is enormous. I can go through them. To summarise, last one, I promise. The issue about why it's in the Constitution is for certainty. There have been 6 attempts at having the Aboriginal voice. And there's some minister gets up in the morning, has an epiphany and decides to abolish the voice. We go back, we start again. We get on the merry-go-round. We're sick and tired of that. You can't keep doing it. It's about having certainty. We don't want to be subject to a 4-year election cycle. Policies change every 4 years. We've got to start again and start again and start again. They don't do it. So not recycling it. Remember the sequence is important. That's why the voice is first. To follow, the voice will not deal with sovereignty. That's a matter for each nation to deal with. Through a treaty, nation by nation, not for the voice. The voice is there to facilitate it, provide resourcing, ensure it's resourced properly. and the detail of the composition, functions, powers and procedures will be discussed and legislated by the Parliament after the referendum. That's what our Constitution says. That's parliamentary supremacy. That's what we abide by, and we recognise that. I don't know why the coalition doesn't, but that's up to them. And there's some of the issues that we will address. I mean, the IS scheme is still going, despite being a disaster. People are still being incarcerated. It's been normalised. Racism is normalised. Misuse of alcohol and drugs is in denial. I mean, it's in denial for the whole country, not just Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We're a country that was founded on grog, and we still are. And the media is just selective. There's no evaluations. The last time it was done, I think there were 395 health programs. When we said how many have been evaluated, 11. They still continue. They're still failing, but that's democracy. Again, those issues, but there's a lot of these to go through, and I won't go through those yet. And I think I'll leave it there. Next. That's it. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Geoff, for laying out so clearly what is in front of all of us to make decisions about. It was wonderful. Now I'd like to give a welcome to Chris, who will express one of the many perspectives in the Darug community and the reasons that led him to a no so far. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, cheers everyone. I'm just going to share about our concerns, or my concerns, but it's not just my concerns. There's a lot of people I'm meeting on the street coming to ask me about it. And people are confused. Non-Aboriginal people are confused, Aboriginal people are confused. Most people I meet aren't a hard yes or a hard no, they don't know. And I think that's healthy. My concern with the Voice is, and please understand, we've had meetings. I live in the Blue Mountains, and we had a Blue Mountains community meeting on this, and it was very enlightening, very encouraging. We had someone come up and talk about the Voice, but it was more a push to vote yes. This is what we've got to do. We've got to vote yes, and there wasn't a lot of discussion, and our concerns weren't met with answers, which concerned us even more. So, look, my job normally is I share a bit of Darug culture with school children and groups and things like that. And one of the ways I get them to understand culture a little bit is to share a bit about traditional Aboriginal culture, and that way people can have an understanding of what our values are today. Now, one of the things in traditional Aboriginal culture was we had our own countries and we had small populations. So we have a tradition of if you had something to say, you got up and said it. The idea of someone representing you is very new for us. Most of us know that when Noel Pearson gets up and makes a statement, he can only speak for himself and maybe his family. He can't speak for the rest of us. And we've had the experience of having other Aboriginal people speak for us in our area here that hasn't gone real well. I am touching, and I'm trying to do this very respectfully, but on the Aboriginal Land Councils. Now that was again good intentions, and I expect the government today is actually wanting good to come, and the Voice I don't see as some sneaky little thing or anything. I think it's an attempt to try and do some good. The difficulty for us is who's going to speak for us. In our community, just our own community here, the Darug community, we don't have someone speaking for the rest of us. Sometimes you'll hear, I'll often get introduced, Chris is a representative of the Darug people. I try to point out lots of times, no, we're not representative. When the government tried to do an Uluru with us, I was trying to explain to them too that we can't make laws to bind other Aboriginal people or other Darug people. Right, okay, and they pressed on. And so we weren't listened to by the government then. And look, I don't think it's going to be a horrible thing one way or the other, all right? And I share that with people. I've heard some people make really dramatic statements, you're going to damn us to hell if you vote no. I think that's over the top, right? Because my reasons for no is like people want it to be, they want it to be right. They want it to be representing Aboriginal people, but I'm not confident that they will. When the Uluru Statement was put together and they had regional meetings and that, we weren't talked to. The Blue Mountains community wasn't talked to. Not just Darug people, the Blue Mountains community wasn't talked to. And that was one of our objections was, well, we weren't even talked to when you were putting this together. What makes you think we're going to be, why should we believe we're going to be talked to when that's happening? And we were just told to have faith, brother, have faith. And we've been waiting for things to be righted in our country for a long time, and that having faith wearing thin. It's not that like I say, I don't think it's going to be a horrible thing. My concern though is that if there's a voice done nationally, people are going to stop listening locally. I know I get slammed into going, you're going to be sitting with all the racists. That's just unfortunate. I also, I'm sure racists want clean water too. It doesn't mean I'm a racist because I want clean water and they do as well. So I don't like being popped in the camp with Jacinta Price. I've never voted for her parties. And I mean, I actually use Warren Mundine as an example of what could happen. What if he's the voice? The whole country will be cemented and mined because there's a lot of Aboriginal people that are okay with that. Now, I'm not, you know, I've got my own view on that, and there's other Aboriginal people that do that. That's up to them. But it would be very hard to speak, let's just say the mining issue. Some of us have got kids or are working for mining companies. Others of us are sitting there trying to stop mining companies. How's a voice going to put that one? Now, they're going to tell the government, please respect Aboriginal people's sovereignty. And they can tell the government that. We've been telling the government that for years. I don't think what a voice is needed. I think we need the government to grow an ear, right, and listen. Because there's no, I don't think there's any new information going to be shared with the government that they're going to suddenly change and stop locking us up and selling our land to whoever waves the most dollars in front of them and that sort of thing. I don't think that's going to change. That's my concern. So what I'm mainly doing these days is just letting people know a vote for yes is not necessarily a vote for Aboriginal Australia. And a vote for no is not necessarily voting against Aboriginal Australia. And I think we need to be really careful that we don't go into when they were doing the marriage law thing and it gets all nasty, right? I ask people, just do what you think is right. In the Darug community, we're divided on that. I've got a very close brother. He hears my arguments, but he's still going to vote yes. I loved in our community, though, we were sitting there, we were quite surprised. I was thinking everyone's going to vote no, and then half of us are going to vote yes. And the ones who are going to be yes looking at us going, you're voting no. But the beautiful thing was, people asked questions of each other and listened to each other. And I think that's what we need to do. But I share the difficulties. So Aboriginal culture is quite different from other cultures, particularly English and a parliamentary system. All right, so I often share the story of the fellow that worked with my mob on the Blackstown. So when it was the Blacktown, it was there was a land grant given to one of our ancestors. She was actually the daughter of Yarramundi. Or actually, his son was given the land grant. His sister asked for it when he passed away. And that became the foundation for what is now Blacktown, the largest Aboriginal population in Australia, apparently concentrated there. When the missionary was working with our mob on the Blacktown, I share this with people so they get an understanding of the complexities of it sometimes. He wrote back to the London Missionary Society, and this would have been in the early 1800s, and he was saying, look, he writes, I can't work with these people. He said, it's not like the Maoris or the Pacific Islanders. Over there, you want something done, you go see the chief. If the chief agrees, people fall into line. He says, over here, they don't do that. He says, we look to see who might be in a position of authority over the other. We can't see that. No one's wearing feathers or crowns. So we look to see who might have a bit of influence over his brothers, and we make him chief in the manner of the government. So the missionaries were doing what the government was doing. They would look to see someone, bang, make you chief. He said the problem with that is, if that man is sitting in council with any of his brothers and he offends one of them in the least, he gets a club crashed over his head. He says they are no respecters of this. And it's because our culture, I think, recognises the right of each person to speak and have their voice. Now, I was very concerned when I was hearing that people that were against the voice were being invited out of the room with some talks that were happening, and I don't think that's healthy either. I want to hear what the other... I try to put myself in other people's shoes to hear what they want. Now, I get people would like Aboriginal Australia to all speak with, but I have that so many times. I get, oh, if you people could just all get together. And I'm thinking, this is from people that are under a parliamentary government that has a paid opposition arguing at each other, and you want us to get together. Now, that's my concern, is that people are going to hear the voice, they're going to think that that is what Aboriginal people are saying, because most people don't know about Aboriginal culture or how we work on the ground. So many times, so many awkwardness has happened by being thrown together in rooms with people because they want this thing rolled out, and you people, both Aboriginal people, how's that? And sometimes we don't... We try to be nice and that sort of thing, but we feel very strongly differently on things. So I don't know how the voice is going to capture it. I have heard one argument, I think I'll come up with it actually, for the voice, and that is it might be symbolic, excuse me, as a counterbalance to the system we've got that has a Governor-General advising. It might be a counterbalance symbolically like that. I think if we understood it as a voice or voices to Parliament, and I was pleased to see with Brother Geoff when he had it up there, it was a voice to Parliament, not the voice. And a lot of people are thinking it's the voice. And I think if we just flesh that out a bit, and I mean, when I'm talking for Aboriginal, thanks sis, it's time for change. No, it's just time for me to wind up. Okay. So, yeah, I just... if we can just be understanding that even when those voices are speaking to government, hopefully they're doing what I do, which is I can't speak for Darug people, but I speak for Darug interests. If it's a yes vote, I'm hoping it's going to... that the people that are doing that are going to do their job, run down, good luck, but try to get everyone's ideas on things if they're going to send up something. But again, my concern is that people will think if there's a voice there, I don't have to listen to you. So maybe we can flesh that out so that people understand that that's not the case, that people that Noel Pearson's not speaking for me or anyone else on that voice thing, but they are speaking for Aboriginal interests, and hopefully if that does, that they do a good job. All right, I'll wind up there.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Thank you for sharing your creativity and passion for this, and also expressing some anger and rage at the system of oppression and the horrific fact that Darug have been denied their existence even by other Aboriginal groups in this area. There have been crimes and ongoing mistakes. There also might have been flaws on the way to Uluru and in the years since, and they probably will occur in the future. Yet it seems like the fact that about 720 traditional owners and 240 people from Indigenous controlled organisations and another 240 locally chosen significant Indigenous people have contributed to the amazing Uluru Statement to and for the nation as a whole. It's too precious a gift to let it pass by without acting on it. Now I'd like to introduce our next speaker. A welcome to Brooke with another Indigenous perspective, which is so important to be heard. But before we hear Brooke's reflections, let us first listen once again, or for the first time, to the Uluru Statement from the heart, which Brooke will say for us. Thank you, Brooke.
It's on the back of your yellow sheet.
Thank you so much. I'm not going to start with reading the statement from the heart. I'll finish with reading the statement from the heart. And there's a couple of reasons why I'll do that, which will come out in the next few minutes. But firstly, I announce myself as a Wakka Wakka woman on Darug country. Wakka Wakka Nation is the place of the Bunya Pines and the native grasslands, one of our over 300 nations of Aboriginal peoples in these lands now called Australia, and Wakka Wakka country, specifically in the lands now called Queensland. And with that announcement, I do acknowledge the traditional custodians of Darug country and pay my respects to the elders past, present and future. Thank you, Uncle Chris, for your welcome acknowledgement of country. And to all Aboriginal peoples here, I bring my acknowledgement to your country, to your elders and to your family. And thank you, Uncle Geoff, for speaking as well tonight. So I have been doing work on sovereignty, treaty and Australia's constitution in educational seminars for the last 11 years. And I mix with many different people right across these lands now called Australia. I'm involved with a number of large networks of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, but specifically Christian leaders, as well as non-Indigenous peoples in all various walks of life. So I said I wasn't going to start with a statement from the heart, but this might be different to the other seminars I run around this size because of who has put on tonight as a reconciliation group. But if you are able, I would love you to stand up if you have read the Uluru Statement from the Heart before tonight. Great, so thank you. You can sit down. I hope you do realise that not everyone in this room stood up. And as I said, this is a reconciliation group. When I do that around the country, sometimes no one stands up in a group of 100 people. A couple of weeks ago, I did a professional development session with 60 teachers from one school. Not one of those 60 teachers had read the Statement from the Heart. So the Uluru Dialogue and Yes 23 have a lot of work to do. Australians are missing base information. One of the other things that I see missing in the conversation is there isn't just yes and no, and there isn't just undecided. There's yes and then a whole bunch of variants on the way to no, as well as undecided. And that's specifically around the diversity of Aboriginal opinions, voices and leadership. And regardless of that, one of the things I'm bringing to the conversation, and it echoes Uncle Chris as well, is that whether people are yes or no or a variant or undecided, what I want, my hope for this nation and for all Australians is that we listen to each other and we listen with love and compassion. If you are a hard yes and you go in and tell people that are voting no that they're doing disastrous things, just listen to each other with love and compassion. That is what's desperately needed. Also, we have heard tonight voice, treaty, truth. I do not believe that there was a sequence that it should have been voice one, treaty second and truth third. And lots of Aboriginal people, myself included, have treaty, truth, voice, truth, treaty, voice. Please remember the Commonwealth already has the power to make treaties. Section 61 of the Constitution. My whole life, I'm 42 and next week I turn 43, but my whole life, the conversation in my Aboriginal communities has been about treaty. Treaty could happen today. It could happen tomorrow. The Commonwealth already has the power. They have made over 2,000 treaties internationally. We have international models. It is the thing we have been asking for the longest, and it's one of the only things that brings us together as equal parties, as Aboriginal peoples and non-Indigenous peoples, to actually work out how this relationship will work in this country. A truth-telling commission is vitally important until all Australians have a shared understanding of our shared history of the last 250 years, as well as the over 65,000 years, according to science, of our history as Aboriginal peoples of over 300 nations in these lands now called Australia. How can we move into a shared future together? I'm also very concerned, a referendum, yes, we need the double majority. If we only get 51% of a yes, if the referendum was successful, what does that say for us as a country? And what does it mean for the lives of Aboriginal people? We suffer racism every day. As the great Uncle Jack Charles once said, Aboriginal people suffer a peculiar type of racism. And if you don't know that, I don't know why you don't know that. We've already been copying it about the voice to Parliament. So my key message is to listen with love and compassion. Even if an Aboriginal person turns up to Parliament House draped in an Australian flag, I might not agree with that position, but they deserve to be met with by our parliamentarians. Every Aboriginal person deserves to have their voice heard and their leadership recognised. We can't exclude, otherwise we continue to silence, ignore and disrespect Aboriginal voices, which has been happening for 250 years. The time for that is to finish, for that to stop and for us to move into a different future together that recognises Aboriginal peoples as the world's oldest living, continuing cultures. As Uncle Chris said, so many people don't know about our cultures, and I'm shocked. I ask these 6 basic kind of trivia questions when I do my work in schools, and people don't know the answers. Educators don't know the answers. And it helps them to then go, wow, we've got a lot to learn. But if we don't know each other, how can we build that relationship? And it's something like 90% of Australians don't know an Aboriginal person. And so our non-Indigenous peoples who do want to vote yes, what you also need to be doing in your conversations is talking about treaty and truth telling. They are both there in the Constitution. My greatest fear is that the referendum succeeds and people say, what's this treaty business you want? We gave you the voice. We've never heard about treaty. If you've never heard about treaty, go and read the Ururu Statement. If you've read the Statement from the Heart, read the 1988 Ururu Statement. Bob Hawke, the then Prime Minister, promised us a treaty. I was 8 years old. Yothu Yindi's song Treaty in 1991 was not a request for treaty. It was a protest song. The beginning lyrics, go and read the lyrics. We heard it on the radio, we saw it on the television back in 1988. All those talking politicians. Words are easy, words are cheap and can disappear like the writings in the sand. That was about the Ururu Statement. And so the Statement from the Heart is a culmination of decades of Aboriginal voices and leadership. Do never forget William Cooper in 1937-38 and his petition asking for an Aboriginal seat in Parliament, not to Parliament, in Parliament, 1937. And he even said, if you're not willing to give us a seat as Aboriginal people, please let us pick one of our white friends. The depth of the forgiveness, the grace, and the extended hand of friendship that is still there to get today. But you must listen with love and compassion to all Aboriginal voices in this country. We all deserve to be heard. Just a final comment on race, and then I'll read the Statement from the Heart. There's lots of talk at the moment. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice to Parliament does not put race into our Constitution. Australia's Constitution was established based on race, and it is still in our Constitution today. And so in 1967, it resulted in the removal of the words peoples of the Aboriginal race, as well as removing section 127. And so race was in our Constitution from the very beginning. It got omitted in 1967, but still in our Constitution today. Section 25 is called the disqualification of voting on the basis of race. Race is in Australia's Constitution. The lawyers will tell you that Section 25 doesn't have any effect today, but it's one of the things that needs to be corrected. The voice to Parliament does not put race in the Constitution. It's already there and is founded on race. And we need to face up to that as a nation. My dream is actually that we rewrite our Constitution. After apartheid in South Africa and their Truth-Telling Commission, they rewrote their Constitution. South Africa's Constitution is their 5th Constitution. And so let's mature as a nation together. But never forget treaty and truth, and have those in your conversations now as well as closing the gap. We need to do all of these things. And I'm a person that's spoken to 3 parliamentary inquiries in the state of Queensland, to where the Parliament has dismissed what those parliamentary inquiries, and I was usually the only Aboriginal person on the inquiry. They're ignoring medical people and lawyers, and the last one was on raising the age of criminal responsibility. Every one of those, except for 2, which was the Queensland Police Union and a former police commissioner, said raise the age to the international recommendation of 14 years. And a Labor government voted that down. And so we need you to be participating every day, not just waiting for the referendum, each and every day. And so I don't howl at the moon, I fight for justice. And I cry out to my Lord each and every day, how long, O Lord? As have many Aboriginal peoples over many decades. And that's where we need our non-Indigenous friends. And so if you have read the statement from the heart, my other question to you is, can you quote it? Do you remember a line from it? That's your next task, to learn a line. Have it with you, not to start an argument with people, but to have that as a way to spark the conversation. Have you read the statement from the heart? No, I haven't. Well, let me tell you, do you know it says this? And so with this, let me finish with these words from the statement from the heart. I don't want you to read your piece of paper. I want you to actually look at me and to listen with your hearts, and to pick out which is the line or lines that you'll remember, if not learn the whole thing off by heart. We gathered at the 2017 National Constitutional Convention, coming from all points of the southern sky, make this statement from the heart. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This our ancestors did according to the reckoning of our culture from the creation, according to the common law from time immemorial, and according to science more than 60,000 years ago. This sovereignty is a spiritual notion. The ancestral tie between the land, or Mother Nature, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom remain attached thereto, and must one day return to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished, and coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. How could it be otherwise? That people possessed a land for 60 millennia, and this sacred link disappears from world history in merely the last 200 years. With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe this ancient sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australia's nationhood. Proportionally, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are alien from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them. And our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people and take a rightful place in our own country. When we have the power over our destiny, our children will flourish. They will walk into worlds and their culture will be a gift to their country. We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia and a better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. In 1967, we were counted. In 2017, we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across the vast country. We invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future. Thank you.
My goodness. A lot to take in. Thank you, Brooke, for pouring out your heart. And I think there's a lot of resonance among us. And this statement speaks so much that it is hard to even talk after it. I have it in my pocket for 6 years, and with underlines and all that stuff. And I still need to listen to it again and again. I would like us to just take a moment to let it sink in. All of what we heard during the evening so far, and see what resonates deep down. The information and the appeals for opening further and for being larger human beings that include the whole past and the whole future, and really learn to live on this planet, on this particular earth, in new ways, with new eyes, new hearts, new commitment to a different future. Just a moment. This is the beginning of a new beginning. It is wonderful to be among people who are willing to be present and to listen and to learn and to find new ways of being human on this earth. This is a gift that you were willing here to all be present and allow the silence to be part of us. It's the new beginning. If we imagine one day we won't have parliamentarians and media and everybody else fighting each other, and I'm better than you, and this is the right way, and this is what we should do. It's great. So thank you very much for that. Thank you. Now, we are a little bit over time, of course. How could it be otherwise? But we still feel it would be important, and before the break, that you talk with each other just for a few minutes, and you distill, after maybe sharing what struck you. Your question is on the white sheet on the other side. What struck you in what you heard before, so far, and the other one, and that's the important one, what would be important for you to be answered before you feel comfortable about deciding what you want to do regarding the vote once you're in the voting place? I mean, not tonight, in the polling booth. Right. Okay, so those two questions would be good. So what we suggest is just meet around in a bunch of people, maybe 8 people, 6 people, whatever feels comfortable. So some of you have to turn backwards or forward, depending. And then we give you a sheet of paper, and we would like you to put your questions on an A4 sheet, like that's this sheet, with a big marker, in a landscape format. So this is the format, okay? And then you put them up when we are ready. We put them up on the whiteboard, and then the speakers will decide how they will answer your questions. Maybe some of the questions just fit together very nicely, and we don't need to have them all up. But in your groups, if possible, don't have oodles of questions, but maybe focus on one or two or so. Yeah? Could you do that? It's usually good if people talk with each other for a moment before we listen again. We need to let it sink in. Yeah? So meet with some people and we give you sheets of paper. As you will have noticed, we are over time. So rather than doing this in the very last minute, I would like to ask you, would it be all right if we went 10 minutes extra? We have to be out of here by 10, but with some help in resetting and all the rest, we will manage that, I think, if we go over time a little bit. Okay. Thank you very much. So here we are, moving along. So it's clarifying some more of what we need to learn in order to feel okay about making our decisions with our conscience at the time when it's ready to be made. And thanks again to all the different perspectives that really create a larger whole, and none of it belongs to any one of us. It belongs to all of us. This is a new venture. And it depends on all of us to make a difference and to participate and not be a bystander. So thank you very much for the speakers to be responsive to your questions. There we go. Who is first? Who is first?
This one. I'll pick the simple ones first. One was, what structure will the voice have? Now, the point I made on that is there is no structure that's being put in place at the moment. There's got to be a process where Parliament appoints a joint state committee, and they'll go out and talk to people about the structure and try and take it into account and then come back with a model. But I suppose I'll make the point that the hard work starts post-referendum. If this comes out and the Australian people actually give Aboriginal people to recognise Aboriginal people and provide a voice, then the hard work starts then. You have to make it work. And it's how you represent all local groups in that voice and how you ensure that happens. And there's like, I can say what I think it'll go to be, but the voice has got to be a lobby. It's got to make sure that local voices have a role and get before decision makers. And what section of the Constitution will be amended? Well, the proposal suggested a new section, section 129, which will be the voice section. It comes after 128 in the Constitution, so it's a new section. And that's what's in the amendment. I should have put it up there, but I think I did, but I got a quote saying my writing was too small. I'll come back and try and amend that. But the new section is section 129. Okay, it's those two.
I've got one here, which was the marriage equality vote was yes, and the people that voted yes benefited, or those who wanted that change benefited, and the people that voted no, there was actually no change for those that voted no. So the question is, if we vote yes, how can we be worse off? So just a couple of comments on this one. It's one I get asked a lot around comparing the marriage equality. Remember, it was a plebiscite, not a referendum. One of the key differences is with the plebiscite, a lot of people that ended up voting yes, they had family members who would be affected by the legislation. The difference here is, as I said in what I said, 90% of non-Indigenous Australia does not know an Aboriginal person. Many people don't know Aboriginal people whose lives would be affected by either yes or no. I think it is different if a no was to happen. I think it puts treaty and truth further behind, and closing the gap and reconciliation, which are all things to think about. yes, could do the same with that, because if you then only have one representative group, but also remembering that there's supposed to be local and regional groups that feed into the national group, but that's more like what Uncle Chris was saying, which is a very valid point as well. But a lot of Aboriginal people are saying, and Aboriginal people are compromising all over the place as well. The media don't want to tell you that story. Some who are passionate about treaty are like, okay, let's just get this voice done so that we can get treaty and truth telling. If a no happens, well, there's fears that treaty and truth won't happen because of how it's been set up as a sequential order. And so that's all the same, all important. So just remember not to compare too heavily to the marriage equality plebiscite. I think would be my advice on that question. Other Aboriginal people are saying if the voice happens, well, it's better than what we have now, which is things are pretty bad. But the government also needs to listen to the voices that are consulting and advising them and have been for a long time and just do their jobs. Okay. How are we going now?
Chris, are you next?
So Simon, I'll have to read that first before I have a say on anything. But I took two off the board here that talks about questions were, how can there be an Indigenous sovereignty under the Crown's constitution, in brackets, not a republic? And the second one is the Uluru Statement acknowledges Aboriginal sovereignty as coexistent with Crown. By doing this referendum, does Aboriginal sovereignty get forfeited? How does this sovereignty materialise? I just wanted to comment on that. I don't have an answer for that. I don't know. But that was one of the issues I had with the Statement of the Heart, actually. Beautifully written document, but there's just one line I kept tripping over, and that is acknowledging that our sovereignty coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. I don't accept the sovereignty of the Crown at all. I explained to kids, I explained to anyone, I said, our kids know that you can't come from the other side of the world, whack your flag in someone's country and pretend you own it. And our courts keep going with that. So I don't think it's going to affect our sovereignty at all, because our sovereignty is not changed by the government not recognising it. I love that, and the reason I don't want to lose the diversity of Aboriginal nations in this country is that our sovereignty is strengthened by respect for each other's country and for people to speak for their own country and that. Now, there is an issue, though, with there's a lot of Aboriginal people, because of the stolen generation, that do not know where their country is, so I get that they need a voice too. There might be another way of doing it. Again, I don't have the answers for that. That's the problem. People go, well, give us a better solution. So I didn't create the problem, so I don't have the answer for that. It would be, though, I like actually Brooke's idea that we probably need to maybe deal with treaties, and I think even Brother was saying that we, there's things to be done before we can nut out details on that. But yeah, it's not going to affect Aboriginal sovereignty becoming a republic. Mind you, I think we've got a good opportunity, while there's still such a thing as Crown land, for God's sake, that we deal with it now. My worry is that if we became a republic, suddenly it's like, don't worry about that, this is everyone's country, mate. And there's still that thing already. But yeah, it's everyone's country, except some of us are paying rent to the other half of Australians, and that's not cool. And we can fix that, maybe. Oh, question? Yeah, I'm happy to take questions. Yes, you are.
Yeah. So that question came from our group, and I guess it's been one of my major concerns as a Bunjalung woman, First Nations woman of this country, is Okay. So my understanding, and I don't have a big understanding of the Queen's Constitution or the Crown's Constitution, but my understanding is, like, quite clearly, if we as Aboriginal people go into the Constitution and say that we're giving permission for people to make laws, for the Crown to make laws for our people, that's us ceding our sovereignty as decision makers in our country. So I think it is going to impact on our sovereignty and our decision making when we're giving away that permission by stating it within the Constitution under the Crown.
Yeah, fair. Anyone? Yep.
I think it's probably good to hear Uncle Geoff's perspective as well, but that's a very valid point, and that's why Aboriginal peoples hounded the government so long. Anthony Albanese came out and said it would not cede our sovereignty, and this is where it'll be interesting to hear Uncle Geoff, but this is why many of us believe treaty should have come first, because it's about two sovereign nations getting together. So if you listened when I read out the statement from the heart, my tone changed when I said it coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. Also, that our sovereignty is a spiritual notion. Yes, it is, but what spiritual notion means to Aboriginal people, that's our political, legal, social, environmental, ecological, economic, and spiritual, and that includes that legal. Yes.
So yeah, my only other comment to that, Sis, was when we talk about treaty, my understanding of treaty, once again, I'm saying I'm not in a position to talk like I'm an expert at all, but what my understanding of a treaty is it's two sovereign parties of equal power coming to the table to make decisions. And so what I'm saying is, how can we talk treaty when we haven't talked sovereignty or built what our sovereignty looks like or have sovereignty? So how can treaty come before sovereignty, and how can the voice not impact on Aboriginal sovereignty when we're giving up our rights to make decisions for ourselves by going into the Queen's Constitution?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So when we are recognised in the Constitution, even though our Aboriginal leaders who've been involved in these dialogues are saying that it doesn't cede our sovereignty, I don't see how it can't, because you're going into the Constitution, which was never our document. It's a colonial document written in 1901 by two handfuls of white men. Women weren't even part of that Constitution. And so... yes, I mean, even into the question, I'm quite disappointed. I liked what Albanese said at the Garma Festival. It was just, will you agree or vote to establish a Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice to Parliament? It now says First Peoples of Australia, which I understand is more a UN kind of convention, but a lot of us don't like being called First Peoples of Australia, as well as... that it recognises us. Aboriginal people overwhelmingly rejected constitutional recognition. And sadly, I think it got in there to try and appease the Liberal Party, because all they want is recognition and not any other rights for Aboriginal people or a voice. But no one's game to go there and hasn't interrogated it. I tried to with one member on that big group that's come up with the question, and was told that he had never heard that Aboriginal people didn't want to be recognised in the Constitution. Yep. So, and he's one of the lawyers on the group. So, we've still got a long way to go in listening to mob as well. But I agree with you, and I guess, any Pacific Islander nations people here, often they're the ones that can really talk about sovereignty, and we need you fellas to speak up more about what it means to be sovereign. And you can go to the federal government website, and there's a whole treaty making process, and a treaty can only be made between sovereign nations. This is where we have to sort ourselves out as Aboriginal people, but I think you could make a national treaty, and this was one of the questions I had, that protects our universal human rights as Aboriginal peoples and things that affect all of us. So things like protection of all of our sacred sites, so we don't have to fight every state government, and the biggest fine for destroying a sacred site is $125,000. But yet we have to fight all the cultural heritage acts of all the different states. Another thing to go into a treaty, return of all our ancestral remains. That was in the Ururu Statement in 1988. Why do these universities and museums around the world still have our skulls and bones of our family members? What price are they putting on that? And that's not just overseas, that's universities and museums here in Australia. Prince William promised to get us Pemulwuy's skull. I don't think we've got it yet. So I'm answering the next question that I had, which was what would go into a treaty. Another thing, One of my Canadian friends, Indigenous friends, under her treaty arrangement, they don't have to pay GST. They get GST back, which I think would be a great way of reparations for Aboriginal peoples. Also to give Aboriginal people a free funeral. Why do we have to pay $6 to $8 grand to get buried in stolen land and Aboriginal land? And that would be a great way of addressing the stolen wages and the poverty, or the impacts why we have poverty today from stolen wages that still affect our people today. So that was answering that question.
Okay. Going back to sovereignty, we've got the best advice possible about sovereignty. Going into the getting a voice won't affect sovereignty. We've got that advice and it's there, and there are different people with different opinions. The only way sovereignty is affected, people are sovereign and it's not taken away unless you agree to it. You can only do that through treaty. That's the issue, the response to this one. And we've got the best advice we can on these from everywhere. So that's our view. We're talking about what's going in a treaty. We haven't had the debates about what goes in a treaty. Everyone's now going to it. Queensland's now advancing down the track of looking at treaties, and it's been coming out in the press lately. But we have to have somewhere to have these discussions.
Sovereign nation either.
Well,
so it's only an agreement. It's in the spirit of treaty. It's not a treaty because it's only sovereign nations that can make a treaty. So it's more like a service agreement.
In that case, all the ones in Canada wouldn't be valid. But I don't think we had enough debate about what treaties are and who should make them. We haven't even sorted out who should make them from the Aboriginal side. We have to have those debates. We have to have the space and safe spaces to have these discussions and get the best legal advice we can so we can actually match the government's technocrats, match their legal advice and put us in a position where it's more of an equal playing field. That's the real challenge in front of us. That's why the Voice was actually put up as something going forward, is to try and actually advance those issues. We've been trying to talk about treaties and addressing sovereign issues for decades. The discussion at the Uluru Statement and the National Convention was how do we get there? And the real call from people is we need influence. The Voice is influence. There's another one here about why hasn't the Voice got a veto power? There is no way that the Australian government or the people of Australia are going to give someone else a veto power over their own constitution. It's not going to happen. Sorry.
Is the issue why we've never made it to treaty the fact that we keep trying to do it by their law? We got
By?
our own law. We keep trying to get treaty through the means of their law. We have our own law. I mean, we get given stopped by their law, but personally, we don't recognise the Crown's superiority. We don't recognise Parliament's superiority given to them that the Crown has. You know, the Crown is their head of state. We don't recognise that. So why do we have to do it by their law? Why don't we just go and do what we want to do when they try to stop us and we talk to them?
They got the guns.
You can try that if you wish. There are a few nations that tried that. And there's even in the US there are people who say they're not sovereign, they're sovereign citizens. It's the same debate. Looking at something which is not only practical but that will work. I think we owe it to people to get an outcome that's going to work. Now I understand the positions about we don't recognise issues and don't recognise the sovereignty issues, but sovereignty is not something you've got to give it away. You've got to by agreement and by treaty. It's still there. That's the point.
But that statement in the Constitution, that statement point 3, well the whole 1, 2 and 3 actually, that is clearly for me pointing towards us giving that permission to cede our sovereignty for the government to make powers on behalf of our people.
Well,
It clearly states it in the 3 different...
Sorry, can I just answer this one? I respect your position, but nowhere does it say we cede sovereignty. The government's already making the policies. It's already making the issues, so nothing's changing. How do you have part of it's having a greater say in what they're doing. I mean, do you think spending $30 billion a year and having no progress is acceptable? I think it's an indictment on everyone. We don't want another whole group of kids growing up on the same issues. When they closed the gap, it's been going 20 years. It's going nowhere.
A lot of that $30 billion is going to non-Indigenous
True,
organisations.
I know that.
Swimming Australia,
Sorry,
$1 million of Indigenous
Yeah.
advancement.
Well, most of native title goes to the opposition. I mean, the native title legislation actually pays for the farmers and the landholders to actually mount the cases. So that's how the government does budgeting. But at the same time, how often do we go on about trying to close the gap? We're 20 years down the track and it's not closing. We need a bigger say in what's going on. And that's what we're talking about.
So when we talk about closing the gap, we know that poverty is a big contributor to all of those factors, regardless if it's domestic violence all the way down to life expectancy. Poverty is the main contributor. And we don't need legislation to legislate us when we already have legal right to land. And that land is our economic. So why would we then agree to something outside of what everyone else gets? We're not asking for something other than what everyone else gets. We have a right to our land. And that's what we've been asking for a long time. This Uluru Statement stuff just mirrors the panel that Julie and Willard talked about. It literally says the same stuff that they said 5 years before, a bunch of parliamentary and solicitors. How did you get 250 people in a room that mirror the exact same thing that they said 5 years previous?
Well, with respect, they didn't. What was on that statement was a clear message from people that they weren't going to talk to politicians anymore because it was a road paved with frustration and disappointment. We weren't getting anywhere. This is about appealing to the Australian people. And what the elders said in the room, and a lot of the people said, we're appealing to the goodness in Australian citizens, the fair-mindedness, to actually recognise where we are and give us a go. That's what the focus is, and that's where it should be. I understand the questions about sovereignty, but we live in a society where the laws are being made anyway. Do you want to have an influence on that? That's the question you've got to ask. It's not going to affect sovereignty. The Makarrata Commission has already been established in some respects, and it's ready and set up to go.
Agreeing to those laws as being what governs you is different to having those laws enforced. That's the bottom line to it. Like, we have to agree to something. If they change the language, I see that this can be a great thing, but the language is just not. It has to be changed before there can be positive, positive towards this as a solution.
Okay. Then you need a voice to start negotiating what the changes are. There's questions here, I'll try and answer these ones. Again, why is a voice important before treaty? I tried to go through that in terms of what the sequence was about. It was about trying to level the playing field. We've been trying to negotiate treaties and address the sovereignty issue for decades. But having a say in what happens to that and trying to have a voice in there, if you get a treaty, it's going to be legislation, which the government can amend, the next government comes in, can abolish it. Who's going to monitor it? Who's going to monitor breaches? We've got to think about that, but that's a discussion we've got to have.
It's an internationally recognised one, and that's
but who's... Sorry, I respect that. Can I? Well,
so that's why it's treaty and treaty.
If you can tell me a court of law that's going to challenge the Australian state, I'll be glad to see it. The other one,
Or Canada and the United States of America.
That's recognised in their constitutions. The Canadian one is Section 35, which recognises constitutions and rights. That would be a great way to get it in, but it hasn't happened here. I mean, the capacity to change the Australian Constitution was very limited. I mean, half the Australian people don't know we have a constitution, let alone what it says.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And from that point, we're a lucky country because they go overseas and do lectures about where rights are at. They marvel at Australia. We're the only country without a Bill of Rights. And we say, why is that? Well, the point is because we're a lucky country. We've never had to have
It's horrific we don't have a Bill of Rights because there's no we the peoples. And our Constitution is the most uninspiring document in the world.
Okay, I can agree with you, but that's the fact. There's not one there. But the point there is that the Australian public has never been challenged. The general Australian, the general community, the main population lives so comfortably. No one's had a civil war here. They bombed Darwin once and didn't tell us. Sorry.
You're standing on Darug country.
So can we don't pick? Can I have a say, or are you going to cut me off? That wasn't a challenge to the Australian state. I mean, I'm talking about where other countries have had major issues. They've been invaded. They've had issues going on. I'm making the point is the Australian public is very comfortable with dominant issues, and that's why it's so difficult. And that's something you've got to challenge because it doesn't affect them. They're very comfortable on it. There's issues here about what does representations make and what will the power of the voice be if it's got no veto power. We're never going to get the Constitution or a Constitutional Amendment to agree to usurp the power of Parliament. That is just not going to happen. And it won't happen internationally either. You have the United Nations. The United Nations is a collection of states. of which Australia is one. They will never challenge the sovereignty of Australia. We have a window in the United Nations through the various provisions and conventions, which gives us a say, and we've maximised our input on those. So it's really just saying this is where it is. We're trying to get the best provision here and try and get the best approach we can get. The failing voice issues, what have we got? How Indigenous people been involved in it? People keep talking about a Canberra voice. Well, if people who want to keep mouthing that agree with Peter Dutton, it's not about a Canberra voice, it's about having local voices. The role of the voice itself would to make sure those local voices are heard when decision makers are there, that their priorities and their aspirations are heard. I mean, the only thing we've been heard at the moment is what the politicians and the media wants. The voice has got to shine a light on where there's injustice and when there's problems in the country, and get action on it. That's what it is. It won't deal with sovereignty. That will be dealt with by treaty. I understand people's views about it, and they'll have various views about what the legal ramifications of that are. We try to get the best advice possible internationally and nationally. And the view there is it won't affect sovereignty. That's for each nation to address, not for a voice. And the government will continue to make laws and roll out programs. If we don't have a say in them, they'll have the same impact. I, for one, don't want to see the next generation of kids grow up in the same position they are now. I hope the voice actually advances a lot of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And that's really, and the real point there was, you go to the Northern Territory and the people at Ross River, their greatest issue was that their voice was taken away when the intervention went in. They abolished all their councils. They still have administrators running their communities. And both Labor and Liberal support that. This is not a partisan issue. We have problems with both Labor and Liberal. Labor abolished most of our voices, not Liberals. I mean, the last budget was ridiculous. Again, we don't have a voice. So what else?
Thank you very much.
Any more?
I've got one here. It says, have the elders of each clan and tribal groups, 400 to 700 in Australia, been consulted and agreed to the voice and treaty proposals? Well, the answer is obviously no. I can just speak from experience. We don't, and our voice is not heard today, but I don't believe a voice, I don't think the government's going to start listening to us once a voice is voted in. I really don't. And I think we're in danger of speaking it up like that because, one, if it doesn't get in, people are going to be crushed. If it does get in and nothing happens, we're where we are right now. And the other question is, what happened to ATSIC and Section 129? I don't know about what that is. Can the voice replace ATSIC? Now, ATSIC, someone can remind me, was that government appointed? Yeah. Wasn't?
No, it was not.
Okay, cool. But the government abolished it. Now, they did give us Aboriginal land councils. Now, they may work in other areas, but I know in Sydney, we are actually drowned out by the government listening to the Aboriginal land councils in Sydney when they tell them we do not exist. And that's really difficult for us to believe that another government creation is going to work for us, especially when our local, the Metro Land Council fellow is putting his hands up to be the representative for Sydney when he tells people that we do not exist. So it's not going to work for us having him as our voice.
Sorry, Chris, who doesn't exist, as you say?
The Darug people.
There's a whole debate about whether Darug exists or...
Yeah, there is, which is really odd because we're one of the most documented people in Australia.
It's happening in about 5 or 6 locations just in New South Wales. The same debate.
Yeah, but for Sydney people, yeah, we'd prefer, I guess, and I can't speak for everyone, even in our mob, I can't speak for everyone. If we had to get someone speaking for Darug people, I don't know who we'd pick in our mob either. So that difficulty kind of has just expanded nationally like that. I still think the direction Australians are going to try and get justice, we don't want to kneecap that, but we don't want to limit it either.
I agree. Section 129 is a new section. It didn't exist before, so I'm not sure what that one's about.
Yep.
But ATSIC was legislation, which, again, Mark Latham and John Howard must have had a beer and decided to abolish it, And Mark Latham's still in Parliament, Christ.
The question here is, how will we reconcile with those whose vote didn't prevail? And I guess this nation has been on a reconciliation journey since 1991. Don't ever forget that National Reconciliation Week came out of recommendation 339 from the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody. It comes from one of our greatest injustices that continues to this day. Recommendation 339 was to initiate a process of reconciliation. We're still doing that, but I see Aboriginal people exhausting ourselves doing reconciliation. It's time non-Indigenous people actually came and joined us on that, and I know some of you have been and are involved in reconciliation, but it can't just be a few. It's got to be the whole nation, and it's time for that. So we will need to continue to fight racism in this country. It is massive, and I guess we will have to continue to listen with love and compassion, but with that, correct the myths, the stereotypes that exist about Aboriginal peoples, the horrible things that are said to us, the fact that people still don't understand why my skin is the colour it is. If you say I'm 1%, 2%, 1/200th, you don't know the true history of this country and the decisions my matriarchs had to make to survive and for me to be here today. And that's still affecting our young kids in schools today, that level of racism. And I thought 25 years after leaving school, no one would say that in 2023, but it's still being said. For me to close with, because I do actually need to go, I just wanted to recognise Auntie Wiradjuri Heffernan, who's been sitting down here the front. She is Ananu Pitjantjatjara, which is Uluru is on Ananu Pitjantjatjara country, and Auntie Wiradjuri Heffernan is an amazing artist. Her artwork's currently in the New South Wales Art Gallery. She was a finalist in the Win Prize, and it's a pleasure to have her here tonight and to recognise her. And one of the things Auntie said in her group, Auntie Wiradjuri Heffernan, says she wants us all to talk together. And I think that's a beautiful point.
Thank you for that wonderful presence and words of your farewell, since you have to leave now. Thank you so much for being with us. What a gift of many, many years and all the ancestors with you. What a great... It is probably time to close anyway. If I may, besides the thank you and the lively discussions that definitely need to happen in the future, I wanted to close with two comments, if I may. One is from Auntie Ali Golding, who is a veteran elder and over 80, like actually the two of us are as well, and getting a bit tired from the 40 years that we have been here and have been quite involved in Indigenous issues. Anyway, Auntie Ali Golding was asked the question, what do you think is at the root of the no's that we hear so much, particularly from non-Indigenous people? And she hesitated and then said, I think it is ignorance and arrogance. Ignorance itself is not a problem. If we don't know, we can find out. We can learn, we can study, we can talk with people. We can open books, we can find lots of movies even on this question of the voice, on the internet or wherever we get our resources. But if you have ignorance and arrogance, then you think you know it, and you close your heart and your mind. And she has experienced over endless times how many people close themselves off, so we can't move forward. So the Uluru Statement is actually an invitation for opening our hearts and minds and make the business of justice our own business, whoever we are. And not my business over against your business, but our business as a local group, as a regional group in Western Sydney, as a nation, and finally, as a planet. There's no other way that we can exist tomorrow until we clean up our act and become new people. And I want to encourage you, coming from Germany, in previous decades, before we came here 40 years ago, I experienced the burdens of Nazi Germany on my shoulders, and I still do. And the process of reparations, admitting and changing, deep change, is still happening today. But they did it. They paid oodles of money, not just to Israel, but many people that had been affected, whether they were gypsies or Polish or whatever, or forced laborers, etc. But they also had to do the inner work. Who are we? And it really changed. And then when they had to join up with East Germany, the bad communists, they had to do more. And it's still not finished. There's still injustice and prejudice and animosity, but the process continues. So are we willing to go on such a big journey? I think we are, because the way I felt you were dealing with each other, and that's why I'm so grateful to be here and work with people that are Australians as a part of the whole planet Earth at this time, and learning about that all the ancestors can be with us, and all the future generations, and the spirit world, and the world underneath our feet is all our own life. So let's go and be courageous in trusting that there is a new way. I understand how hard it is to trust these days. Nobody wants to trust government at all. They have messed up so many things. And nobody wants to trust corporations. And if they signed up for the voice, then it's not for me. But if we don't set on a new way, we might as well give up. So let's hope that this will move forward, and that by October we have more clarity, more forgiveness, more understanding, more compassion and love, as Brooke told us about. And thank you so much, everybody. I mean, these people pour out their life every single day, and it must be so hard. They have given so much over endless years, and we can only be grateful, 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 and hopeful, hopeful, hopeful. Thank you for coming. And the Reconciliation for Western Sydney meets on the third Wednesday of the month in Carraby, the place where we couldn't be this time. And you're all invited if you want to work on this a little bit more. Okay, thank you. And anybody can help with the chairs. That would be greatly appreciated.